The Pacific, a vast expanse of ocean, once viewed as a serene frontier, had, by the late 1930s, become a cauldron of escalating Japanese expansionist aims. The brazen 1931 invasion of Manchuria, Japan's defiant withdrawal from the League of Nations in 1933, and the overwhelming seizure of Shanghai by 70,000 troops all signaled an aggressive, unyielding push for regional dominance. The unprovoked sinking of the lightly armed USS Panay on China's Yangtze River in December 1937, brazenly filmed by newsreel cameraman Norman Alley, provided a stark, cinematic warning of this growing menace. Though President Roosevelt, advised by his cabinet, avoided immediate retaliation, the incident hardened American resolve and illuminated the precarious path toward open conflict. Strategic islands like the Polaris were already being fortified, transforming tranquil atolls into defensive bastions, a clear indication of Japan's intent to secure forward bases across the Pacific. This strategic ambition soon extended to the Solomon Islands, where the establishment of Japanese forces on Guadalcanal posed a direct and imminent threat to vital Allied supply lines and, critically, to Australia itself. The American response, Operation Watchtower, was born of necessity, a preemptive strike to seize Guadalcanal and its nascent airfield, thereby establishing a crucial forward base to stem the Japanese tide. The initial amphibious assault, a major landing on August 7, 1942, successfully established an American foothold, securing the airfield that would soon be known as Henderson Field. But this initial success was fleeting. A brief calm before the storm, the struggle for Guadalcanal quickly devolved into a desperate fight for survival, a crucible that would ultimately shift the momentum of the Pacific War. Almost immediately, the Marines found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Admiral Fletcher's controversial withdrawal of his carriers, citing fuel concerns and perceived threats, was followed by Admiral Turner's subsequent order on August 10 to withdraw all transports and cargo ships. General Vandergrift, commanding the Marines, faced a most alarming situation, fearing its demoralizing effect on his men. This perilous isolation was brutally cemented by the devastating Battle of Savo Island on August 9, a major naval defeat that left 250 Allied sailors dead and transformed the waters into Iron Bottom Sound. Abandoned on a precarious beachhead, the Marines battled not only the Japanese, but the debility in battlefield and principal dyad. Relentless humidity, stifling heat, malarial swamps, and jungle rot infections gnawed at them. Their young faces, gaunt from malnutrition and fatigue, looked like those of old, worn-out men. Ammunition dwindled, and a palpable fear gripped the ranks. Many were convinced they would never get off the damned island alive, haunted by whispers of Bataan. Japanese harassment was constant. From the dive-bombing Louis the Louse and the droning washing machine Charlie in the skies to the thundering roar of the Tokyo Express, Admiral Raizo Tanaka's nightly ritual of rapid reinforcers and bombardments aimed at overwhelming the beleaguered American forces. Yet, amidst this unrelenting hell, the 1st Marine Division held. Their tenacious defense prevented Japanese consolidation, culminating in the intense Battle of Edson's Ridge, also known as Bloody Ridge, where Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Red Mike Edson and his raiders made a desperate, pivotal stand, securing Henderson Field against a determined Japanese breakthrough. The tide began to turn with the establishment of the Cactus Air Force, a thin shield of Marine squadrons bravely launching from the baby flat-top Long Island. Though outmatched in speed by Japanese Zeros, their courage proved vital. President Roosevelt, recognizing the deepest national anxiety over Guadalcanal, ordered immediate reinforcements. Admiral Nimitz, distressed by the handling of the operation, replaced Admiral Gormley with Vice Admiral William F. Bull Halsey, whose visit to Guadalcanal via B-17 was like a wonderful breath of spring for the weary Marines. Offering a much-needed psychological boost and the promise of help, a 7-ship convoy soon arrived, bringing crucial reinforcements, tanks, heavy artillery, and vital supplies, rapidly ending the crisis in shortages and regaining a measure of air and sea control. Guadalcanal became the first major offensive victory for the Allies in the Pacific, a critical turning point that prevented the invasion of Australia, secured a vital Allied base, and significantly degraded Japanese naval power, marking the end of Japanese expansion and the true beginning of the Allied offensive, island-hopping campaign. However, the initial victory at Tulagi Gavatu Tanambogo had been marred by controversy. General Rupertus's call for reinforcements, citing staggering casualties, was later believed by some battalion commanders to be based on misinformation or a lack of combat judgment. A myth debunked by later analysis. The battle for Guadalcanal highlighted critical flaws in naval command and coordination, particularly Admiral Fletcher's controversial carrier withdrawal. Yet it also demonstrated the brutal realities of island warfare, forging the resilience of American forces in a crucible of unimaginable hardship, a grim, invaluable lesson for the long, hard road ahead. The 1st Marine Division, battered but victorious, after Cape Gloucester, sailed away from New Britain, leaving behind a landscape scarred by conflict and the relentless forces of nature. Their tactical success had indeed secured a crucial foothold, positioning Allied operations to threaten vital Japanese supply lines and pave the way for General MacArthur's advance towards the Philippines. Yet the true adversary at Cape Gloucester had often been the island itself. The overwhelming monsoon rains, the suffocating humidity, the ever-present mud that sucked at boots, and the ceaseless swarms of disease-carrying insects had proven as formidable as any enemy bullet. Men had fought not just the Japanese, but a pervasive, steamy hell that gnawed at their bodies and spirits. The Japanese defense, once thought to be a consistent, fanatical wall, had in reality fractured and collapsed under these very same environmental pressures. Intelligence gathered after the fact revealed that many of the enemy troops had succumbed to disease and starvation, their command structure dissolving rather than falling in direct combat. The 1st Marine Division, though they had achieved their objective, emerged from the jungle severely weakened, thousands of men suffering from recurrent malaria, dysentery and acute depression, their bodies emaciated, their spirits low. They were in desperate need of extensive recovery. In the immediate aftermath, a fierce inter-service dispute ignited over the division's future. General MacArthur, ever keen to retain his most effective fighting units, sought to keep the battle-hardened Marines under his command for his planned thrust into the Philippines. But Admiral Nimitz Sin-Sea Pak saw the Marine Corps as an integral part of the Navy and viewed MacArthur's claim as an affront to his authority. The contentious debate escalated to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who ultimately ordered MacArthur to return the 1st Marine Division to Naval Command, a direct and unequivocal directive that underscored the Navy's ultimate authority over its own. The Marines, meanwhile, harboured dreams of Melbourne, of wide streets and hospitality. A true rest. Instead, they were ordered to Pavuvu. Major General Roy Geiger, in a hasty decision, based on superficial aerial reconnaissance from a Catalina flying boat that revealed only pleasant beaches and symmetrical palm trees, had selected the undeveloped island for their rest and rehabilitation. It was a catastrophic failure, a decision that would prove profoundly detrimental to the already exhausted troops. One thing was for damned sure, Private First Class Henry Jacobson noted. Pavuvu was to hell and gone in the boondocks. The island was an undeveloped, pest-infested purgatory, contradicting every notion of a rest camp. Upon arrival, the grim reality of Pavuvu struck with immediate force. The Marines were confronted not with respite, but with intense labour, severe privation and conditions that rapidly eroded morale. Their bivouac areas were perpetually waterlogged. Their army reject tents leaked, and the air stank sickeningly of mildew and rot. The promised support never materialised, forcing the men into furnace-hot, brutal labour, drilling their own wells and processing coral for non-existent roads. Food was monotonous and meagre, often weevil-ridden. The island teemed with thousands of blue-black land crabs and vast armies of snarling rats. Their rat-tat-tat-tatting, like drumbeats on the taut canvas, a nightly terror. The sickening stench of rancid coconut milk permeated everything. Unsurprisingly, sickness rates soared, with widespread jungle rot and hundreds of men suffering from ringworm. The psychological toll was immense, morale plummeted, leading to widespread rock-happy or Asiatic conditions, pushing many over the edge. A well-liked captain took his own life, and Marine Corps records quietly listed more than a dozen accidental deaths with no precise explanation. The theory held in some military quarters that deliberate discomfort would make assault troops tougher was proven disastrously wrong. Pavuvu demonstrated that such privation only caused profound psychological and physical harm, undermining combat readiness rather than enhancing it. The true miracle, as many veterans would later reflect, was that so many could function at all, enduring such misery, knowing another battle awaited. Even amidst the despair, a 50-year-old gunnery sergeant, a link to the old corps, stood out, meticulously cleaning his rifle 3 times a day, a beacon of enduring discipline. While the 1st Marine Division endured this slow agony, high-level strategic debates were unfolding across the Pacific. President Roosevelt, aboard the heavy cruiser Baltimore at Pearl Harbor, convened a crucial summit with his top Pacific commanders, General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, to reconcile their clashing visions for the war's conclusion. Nimitz advocated for a direct path to Japan, bypassing the Philippines entirely. MacArthur, however, presented a dramatically different plan, arguing for a direct invasion of the Philippines, framing it as a moral crusade. He emphasized his solemn vow to return to the Filipino people, and highlighted the grave risk of Japanese forces slaughtering prisoners and civilians if the islands were bypassed. This emotional appeal, delivered with MacArthur's characteristic flair, profoundly influenced Roosevelt. The decision to invade the Philippines was not, in the end, purely military. Roosevelt's personal influence and moral considerations, swayed by MacArthur's impassioned plea, proved to be key. Jabbing at islands on the map, Roosevelt declared, "Well, Douglas, you win." This decision, while a victory for MacArthur, also reinforced Nimitz's prior plan to take Peleliu as part of Operation Stalemate, a necessity for a forward base despite its later questioned strategic value. The stage was thus set for the next, even bloodier chapter in the Pacific War. The stage for the Peleliu invasion was not set by meticulous planning, but by a chaotic confluence of flawed intelligence, logistical blunders, and profound leadership discord, effectively ensuring the upcoming engagement would be, as many would later attest, a battle born in confusion. General William Rupertus, commander of the 1st Marine Division, whose leadership style was already perceived as introverted and aloof, further complicated matters by an extended absence in Washington, D.C., during the critical planning phases, while his staff, led by Brigadier General Oliver P. Smith, toiled on Pavuvu to forge an invasion plan. Amidst the complex overlapping demands of the wider Pacific theater, Rupertus's detachment left many feeling alienated. The underlying animosity and differing strategic visions between the Pacific's two titans, MacArthur and Nimitz, continued to cast a long shadow, breeding an environment where inter-service rivalry between the Army and Marine Corps further frayed the already taut threads of coordination. It was a military operation, challenging the very narrative of a perfectly coordinated war machine, revealing instead a web of internal friction and misdirection. A pervasive sense of impending disaster settled over the preparations for Peleliu, fueled by fatally flawed pre-invasion intelligence and a litany of logistical failures. Reconnaissance photographs, taken before the island had been scoured bare by bombardment, painted a deceptively benign picture of Peleliu's terrain, mischaracterizing it as flat and low-lying. The reality was a monstrous geological nightmare, a maze of strange geometrical patterns and grotesque geological formations, comprising steep coral ridges, sheer cliffs, and a honeycomb of natural and man-made caves, all waiting to be exploited by a determined enemy. This fatal misjudgment was compounded by Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's premature cessation of naval bombardment, his belief that targets were run out of, leaving Japanese strongpoints intact. Deeply embedded in the very terrain the Marines were about to assault, logistical breakdowns further crippled combat readiness. A critical shortage of ships, mix-ups in sailing orders, and a dire lack of suitable training conditions on the miserable island of Pavuvu meant the 1st Marine Division, already battle-weary, was sent into the fray, under-equipped and under-prepared. General Rupertus, in an effort to boost morale, offered an over-optimistic forecast, a victory in 3 days, maybe 2. It was a dangerous pronouncement, creating a profound disconnect between the High Command's wishful thinking and the brutal reality awaiting the men. Yet, perhaps the most pivotal and controversial decision came from the highest echelons. Admiral William F. Halsey, fresh from overwhelming success in the Philippines and convinced of its strategic insignificance, vehemently recommended bypassing Peleliu entirely. His proposal for an accelerated Leyte invasion offered a more efficient path to Japan, challenging the very necessity of Operation Stalemate. However, Admiral Nimitz, for reasons that remain debated, perhaps influenced by a commitment to Roosevelt's strategy or even personal aversions, adhered to the original plan. This decision, made in the face of new, compelling intelligence, highlighted fundamental miscalculations of Peleliu's strategic value, and ultimately committed American forces to a costly invasion whose necessity would forever be questioned. The Aleutian stare Nimitz was known for, in moments of ruthless decision-making, now seemed to seal Peleliu's fate, a battle that would bleed profusely for a questionable prize. The long-anticipated D-Day on Peleliu, September 15, 1944, dawned not with a whimper but with a roar that immediately shattered every optimistic prediction. The short operation, a hard-fought quickie that General Rupertus had promised, was, from the first crucial minutes, a brutal, blood-soaked lie. Colonel Nakagawa, the island's shrewd defender, had meticulously transformed Peleliu's natural coral landscape into a killing ground. A formidable obstacle of hidden caves, reinforced bunkers, and mutually supporting positions, designed to inflict maximum American casualties. As HR arrived at 8:30 a.m., the new tight Amtraks, armed with cannons and machine guns, surged towards the shore, only to be met by a searing curtain of Japanese artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire that transformed the treacherous razor-sharp coral reef into a special kind of hell. The scene was instantaneous and devastating. Hulks of burning Amtraks littered the reef, with 26 taking direct hits in the first 10 minutes. Bodies bobbed sluggishly in the shallow water or draped grotesquely across coral outcroppings. Private First Class Charles H. Owen described the terrifying jump from his damaged Amtrak as falling into hell, landing on a beach already strewn with dead and wounded. Navy Lieutenant Edward J. Zedguede, Navy Lieutenant Edward J. Zedguede. Hagen, a combat surgeon, recalled the continuous high pitch of all calibers of guns, punctuated by the continuous whop of mortar fire, making it impossible to hear anything but the chaos. He witnessed horribly wounded Marines, staggering toward the beach, some apparently not wounded physically but mentally out of it. Amidst gazes of water and burning vehicles, the casualties quickly mounted, exceeding those suffered on D-Day in any previous Pacific invasion, except to Tarawa. The main assault quickly stalled under the withering fire. Colonel Stephen V. Sable's 3rd Battalion of the 1st Marines found itself pinned down in a tank trap, overwhelmed by a 75mm gun and the omnipresent 47mm gun from the point, a 130-foot high promontory fortified with 6 feet of coral and concrete. The situation was so desperate that non-infantry troops, engineers, headquarters personnel, cooks and bakers were ordered to the front lines, a testament to the unforeseen ferocity of the Japanese defense. The capture of the point, while tactically crucial, came at an immense human cost, setting a grim tone for the entire campaign. Captain George P. Hunt's K Company, 1st Marines, 235 strong, landed a few hundred feet north, and within an hour nearly half their men were killed or wounded. It was here that 19-year-old Corporal Louis K. Bausel, who had joined the Marines just 8 days after Pearl Harbor, threw his body on a grenade to save his comrades, dying 3 days later. Shortly after 10:30 a.m., Captain Hunt and his survivors stormed the crest. The crucial turning point arrived with 2nd Lieutenant William Willis's successful flanking attack, which finally neutralized the key enemy artillery. K Company, however, was left isolated, low on ammunition, water, and medical supplies, with only 34 effectives. They endured another 30 hours of fierce fighting, facing constant counterattacks in the pitch-black darkness. A nightmare that will remain with me forever, as young Private First Class Braswell D. Dean, an attorney-to-be, would later recount. The brutal heat, with temperatures soaring between 90 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit, caused widespread heat stroke and dehydration casualties. Men, drenched in steaming shrouds of sweat, collapsed as if struck by invisible science fiction ray guns. Compounding this, a critical U.S. planning flaw led to widespread illness, repurposed fuel barrels, improperly cleaned, were used for water transport, creating a vile mixture that tasted evil and caused hellish stomach cramps, violent coughing, vomiting, and diarrhea. One sick sergeant raged. Some stupid son of a bitch sure as hell goofed. Desperation for water was palpable. In a 20-yard-wide shell crater, Marines huddled around a murky, stagnant pool, attempting to purify it with halazone tablets. Corporal James A. Hower, skeptical, declared he'd choke till the fresh water comes up, while Corporal Chesley G. Gilbert, a scout and stretcher-bearer, was so parched he began to submerge himself, proclaiming, "Anything that feels this good must be okay to drink," before being warned of the hell of a stomach full of germs. Amidst this suffering, Captain Paul Douglas, a 51-year-old economics professor, who had volunteered as a private, became a legend. Known as Gunga Din, he selflessly carried 5-gallon cans of water on his back through the blowtorch temperatures to the front lines. Gene Sledge witnessed Douglas, the regimental adjutant, appear to help Marines unload a heavy water drum from an Amtrak under mortar fire, simply wanting to know how you boys up here are making out. Douglas was wounded twice during the campaign, even removing his captain's bars to be treated as an enlisted man, embodying his commitment to shared hardship. By sundown on day 2, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 5th Marines had secured the airstrip, but not without immense sacrifice. Gene Sledge described the attack across the pool table flat airstrip as his worst combat experience of the entire war, calling being shelled in the open terror compounded beyond belief. This costly capture, combined with the losses for the point, starkly contradicted Admiral Nimitz's initial optimistic communique of minimum of casualties, which was quickly replaced by reports of extremely heavy losses. In the late afternoon of D-Day, as General Smith tried to get a handle on the tenuous situation, a Navy observation plane spotted Japanese tanks. At 4:50 p.m, the Japanese launched a well-organized tank infantry counterattack, estimated at between 400 and 500 men, supported by 13 to 19 tanks. This was not a typical banzai charge of tightly bunched fanatics, but a disciplined, dispersed assault designed to disrupt the beachhead. Major Gordon Gale, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, quickly deployed his Sherman tanks, which were far superior to the flimsy, obsolete tankettes of the Japanese. Marine firepower, an impenetrable curtain of 75mm cannon, howitzers, bazookas, and machine guns turned the counterattack into a pell-mell panorama of mass confusion and sudden death. Private First Class Eugene Sledge experienced a moment of intense terror when a friendly Marine tank, mistaking his position, fired its .30 caliber machine gun at him, reducing him from a well-trained, determined assistant mortar gunner to a quivering mass of terror. A Navy carrier plane delivered a 500-pound bomb, further devastating the Japanese assault. The Japanese tanks, no match for our tanks, were swiftly destroyed, with some lit out for the American lines like so many of the proverbial bats from hell, too fast to support their infantry. The decisive defeat of this tank infantry counterattack removed a significant mobile threat for the remainder of the campaign, though it highlighted the enemy's resolve and the brutal, unexpected nature of the fight. As D-Day drew to a close, General Smith's message confirmed all regiments are in contact and dug in for the night, and the attack will resume at 0800 in the morning, a grim promise for the hellish days ahead. The Umabrogol region of Peleliu, a contorted mass of decayed coral, was nicknamed Bloody Nose Ridge by some, Hills of Hades by others, and simply the Pocket by the Marines who fought there. Regardless of its moniker, it was a man-made and natural death trap. Less than half the size of Yankee Stadium, yet it would consume men and material with a horrifying appetite. Colonel Makagawa's strategy was a masterclass in defense in depth, turning every cliff face, every cave, every saw-toothed ridge into a fortified killing ground, designed to inflict maximum American casualties for every inch gained. The terrain itself was an enemy, a forest of spines and crags where picks and entrenching tools were useless against the unyielding coral, and Marines were forced to pile rocks and debris into fragile improvised positions under a blazing sun, constantly swirling dust and debris. American reliance on frontal assaults proved disastrously costly against these deeply entrenched positions. The initial pre-invasion bombardment, prematurely halted by Admiral Oldendorf, had failed to neutralize the Japanese heavy weapons, which were safely nestled in underground bunkers and caves, only to emerge with devastating effect once the Marines committed. It was a brutal reality of close-quarters infantry warfare, where technology often bowed to ingenuity and fanatical resolve. Colonel Puller's relentless, aggressive push-push tactics and his unwavering focus on kill ratios, though legendary, were now viewed by some as contributing to the horrific loss of life. Veterans like First Lieutenant Gordon I Swanson, an artillery spotter, called Puller an arrogant ass, with questionable judgment, reflecting a growing re-evaluation among survivors who questioned the effectiveness of such costly strategies. The fight for Bloody Nose Ridge was not a quick victory over a single location, but a grinding, attritional campaign against a complex maze of deadly coral heights, where every advance was measured in lives. The division, already pushed to its breaking point, was exacerbated by command decisions from above. General Rupertus maintained a bewildering optimistic outlook, ordering a resumption of attacks despite mounting losses, and stubbornly clinging to his belief that the Marines could finish the fight alone. His insistence on offensive action and refusal to commit army reserves prolonged the conflict and drove Marine losses to unsustainable levels. General Geiger, commanding general of the 3 Marine Amphibious Corps, arrived unexpectedly on Peleliu. His methodical scrutiny of casualty reports, during a tense confrontation with Rupertus, confirmed his worst fears. The disagreement over strategy and the mounting casualty rates hung heavy in the stifling air, foreshadowing potential command changes. Even friendly fire incidents, like the devastating airstrike that cost Major Gale's battalion 34 casualties, compounded the misery, adding another layer of horror to an already unbearable fight. Amidst this man-killing hellhole, acts of extraordinary valor continued to emerge from the ranks, often in moments of desperate close-quarters combat. PFC Wesley Phelps, a drafted farm boy, threw himself on an enemy grenade to save his comrade, sacrificing his life in a flash of selfless courage. Similarly, PFC Richard C. Krause, a volunteer stretcher-bearer, encountered Japanese soldiers disguised as Marines who shouted, "Now you die, stupid Yankees." Krause, without hesitation, threw himself on a grenade to protect his companions, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor. These were the raw human moments of desperate fighting, where individual bravery shone brightest against the grim backdrop of strategic blunders. The exhaustion and depletion of the 1st Marine Division became undeniable. The 1st Marine Regiment, the old breed's legendary spearhead, had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force, suffering the heaviest losses of any regiment in Marine Corps history, and reduced to skeleton units. General Geiger, seeing the grim reality, was convinced the 1st Marines were no longer fire-eaters and out of touch with reality regarding their capacity to continue. Despite Rupertus's obstinate, bewildering, nonsensical position that the Marines could press on, Geiger ordered their replacement. The official order to relieve the 1st Marine Division came on October 12 D+27, marking the contentious end of the assault phase. This was nearly a week after Admiral Nimitz, far from the choking dust and screams of Peleliu, had prematurely declared the battle over on October 7th. The arrival of Colonel Robert Dark's Army RCT 321, part of the 81st Infantry Division, was met with Marine skepticism and inter-service friction. Marine staff perceived the Army as lacking vim and vigour, and their initial movements, including a halt despite favourable reconnaissance, left flanks exposed and Marine units covering themselves, including Cycles and Marines Compra, solidifying Rupertus's negative view and leading to his reputed remark, "Now I can tell Geiger, I told you so." The final elimination of the pocket devolved into prolonged guerrilla warfare, demonstrating the extreme tenacity of the Japanese defense and the difficulty of eradicating deeply entrenched enemy forces. The 5th Marines, despite adopting a strategy of lavish firepower and stingy with lives, still suffered a 42% casualty rate. In the attritional fight, the Japanese, living deep underground in dimly lit caves, enduring stale air, constant thirst, and meager rations, fought with fanatical determination, demonstrating the extreme tenacity of their defense and the brutal difficulty of eradicating deeply entrenched enemy forces. Even after the official declaration of victory, pockets of resistance continued to fight for years. A testament to their fanatical resistance, the most remarkable instance occurred nearly 2 years after the war's end, when Lieutenant Tadamichi Yamaguchi and 26 of his troops finally surrendered from their well-stocked underground stronghold on Bloody Nose Ridge, a chilling epilogue to a battle that refused to end. The capture of Peleliu, a tiny 8-square-mile sliver of coral, concluded not with a triumphant roar, but with a lingering, bitter echo. What had begun as a projected 4-day quickie devolved into a 72-day meat grinder, ultimately claiming 8,769 American lives killed, wounded, or missing, and nearly annihilating its 13,000 Japanese defenders. Colonel Nakagawa, who had meticulously fortified the island, sent his final message to Admiral Inoue on November 25, 1944. All is over on Peleliu. Then, with Major General Murai by his side, he burned his regiment's ceremonial colours and committed ritual suicide, leaving fewer than 300 of his men alive. For the Americans, the victory was undeniable, but its strategic utility was not. Other islands had already been secured, and the war's progression had effectively bypassed Peleliu, rendering its hard-won airfields and bases largely obsolete before they could serve their intended purpose. The island became, as some later mused, a gas station and motel that cost a hell of a lot of deaths and misery. A tragic triumph whose necessity would forever be questioned. For the surviving old-breed Marines and their army comrades, Peleliu was a crucible that forged an unbreakable yet agonizing bond. It reinforced the awful, stupid horror of man-on-man combat, a brutal reality that left deep psychological scars. Peleliu was an awful place of horrible memories. They would like to forget, but can't, wrote Henry Berry, describing their recollections of bloody beachheads, the jungles, the hilltops they paid so dearly for, the buddies they lost, the amazing courage and shocking foul-ups. The battle laid bare significant issues in high command coordination, intelligence assessment, and the flexibility of military strategy, exposing a disconnect between the optimistic forecast from afar and the grim realities on the ground. Decades later, the echoes of Peleliu are faint, its immense human cost largely unacknowledged by post-VJ Day generations. In 1952, the last American bodies were exhumed and repatriated, a final, solemn act of remembrance. Yet the island itself, now known as part of the Republic of Belau, struggles with a legacy far removed from the sacrifices made on its shores. On October 7, 1984, a yard-wide, 4-foot-high red granite memorial bearing the Marine Corps emblem and the 1st Marine Division insignia was dedicated on Bloody Nose Ridge. There the stars and stripes still snap in the constant hot breeze visible across the island. A small contingent of 13 Navy Seabees, representing the entire active U.S. military presence, diligently keep the encroaching jungle cleared around the monument. They build schools and hospitals, dig drainage ditches and water cisterns. Their community service a stark contrast to the island's violent past. But few visitors come to this remote monument. Modern Pentagon planners perceive little military value in Peleliu today. Its ancient airstrip is half covered with scrub jungle, a decaying symbol of forgotten purpose. Instead, the island's primary value has shifted to the clandestine. High-grade marijuana, illegally grown and exported, generates millions annually. Implicating high-ranking officials in Koror, the Republic of Belau's capital, massive financial fraud schemes, including a $40 million US guaranteed loan for an oversized electric plant with half the funds unaccounted for, have plagued the young republic. Its early leaders met tragic ends. President Haruo Remelik, reputedly paid millions in the fraud, was assassinated, and his successor Lazarus Salil committed suicide amidst FBI suspicion of his own involvement. This compact of free association muddle highlights the complex, often fraught, relationship between the US and its former trust territory. Japanese widows and families still make pilgrimages to a small Shinto shrine at the base of Bloody Nose Ridge, honoring their dead. But for many, the victory on Peleliu, bought with so much blood and suffering, is overshadowed by contemporary issues of corruption, neglect, and a profound disconnect between past sacrifice and present awareness. It stands as a stark, implicit challenge to the notion that military conquest always leads to lasting strategic or cultural integration. A forgotten battle whose human cost continues to resonate in the quiet corners of history.